Have you ever noticed how there's something deeply ironic about the fact that we change the calendar, celebrate the passage from one year to another, make promises of transformation, and yet, when the party ends and silence returns, that familiar sensation of emptiness continues exactly where it was, as if time were merely an illusion we invented to convince ourselves that something really changes, when in truth, we wake up on January 1st with the same questionings, the same anxieties, the same feeling that something essential is missing. Albert Camus would say this is the most honest moment of the year, when all masks fall away and we confront the naked reality of our existential condition. It's about this universal experience, about this emptiness that persists regardless of the dates that change, that we need to talk today. Because perhaps it's exactly in this recognition that we find not an answer, but a more authentic way of living. The calendar is one of our most ingenious and, at the same time, most cruel inventions. It offers us the illusion that time is linear, that each day takes us somewhere, that there exists a natural and inevitable progress in our lives. But when you really stop and observe your inner experience, you realize that this linearity is an external construction that doesn't correspond to the reality of what we feel. The emptiness you carry today is the same one you carried last year, and probably will be the same one you'll carry next year. This isn't your fault. It's not a sign that you're doing something wrong or that you need to try harder. It's simply the human condition manifesting itself in all its complexity and contradiction. Camus called this the absurd, this fundamental discrepancy between our desperate search for meaning and the apparent indifference of the universe. The calendar changes, but the absurd remains. And perhaps it's exactly this permanence that teaches us something about how to live more realistically and less deluded. When we understand that emptiness is not something to be eliminated, but recognized and inhabited, we begin to develop a different relationship with our own existence. Think about how many times you've caught yourself making elaborate plans for the new year, creating lists of resolutions, imagining a transformed version of yourself that would emerge magically with the turn of the calendar. And think also about how many times these plans dissolved in the first weeks of January, leaving behind not just the frustration of failure, but an even deeper sensation that perhaps there's something fundamentally wrong with you for not being able to transform yourself as you expected. This is one of the most subtle traps of our culture, the belief that external change can resolve internal questions, that modifying circumstances can alter our essential nature. But Camus invites us to a radically different perspective. He suggests that the problem isn't the emptiness itself, but our relationship with it. It's not the absence of ready-made meaning that torments us, but our insistence on looking for a meaning that's already given, already established, by some external force. When we stop fleeing from emptiness and begin to inhabit it consciously, we discover that it's not a black hole that sucks us in, but an open space where we can create our own significance. The calendar can change 1,000 times, but as long as we wait for change to come from outside, we'll continue experiencing the same sensation of incompleteness and inadequacy. The passage of the year is one of the most revealing moments of the absurd nature of human existence. For a few days, we involve ourselves in collective rituals of hope and renewal, as if the simple fact of writing a different number on paper could alter the substance of reality. We party, toast, embrace each other, declare that everything will be different, that this will be the year of our definitive transformation. And then inevitably, we wake up a few days later and discover that we are exactly the same people, with the same fears, the same insecurities, the same unanswered questions that have accompanied us for years. This moment of disillusion, which many experience as a kind of existential hangover, is actually a gift. It's the moment when life forces us to confront reality without ornaments, without the distractions of celebrations and social rituals. Camus would say this is the moment when the absurd reveals itself most clearly, when we realize that our thirst for meaning and order clashes with the apparent lack of purpose in the universe. But instead of seeing this as a tragedy, he invites us to see it as liberation. When we stop waiting for the world to give us ready-made meaning, when we accept that emptiness is an integral part of the human condition, we open space for a completely new form of relationship with life. A form that doesn't depend on calendars, on special dates, on miraculous transformations, but that finds its strength in the human capacity to create meaning through conscious action and deliberate choice. There's something deeply courageous in recognizing that emptiness doesn't disappear with the changing of numbers on the calendar. Because this recognition goes against everything our culture teaches us about progress, about growth, about the possibility of becoming completely different versions of ourselves. We're constantly bombarded with transformation narratives, with stories of people who supposedly changed their lives completely overnight, with promises that there's always a technique, a philosophy, a course that can definitively free us from our existential questions. But Camus's philosophy offers us a radically different and paradoxically much more hopeful perspective. He suggests that real freedom begins when we stop fighting against the absurd and begin to dance with it. When we recognize that emptiness is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be lived with dignity and creativity. The calendar can change, but our essential humanity remains the same, and it's exactly in this permanence that we find not limitation, but the fertile ground for authenticity. Because when we stop waiting for external circumstances to save us, when we accept that we carry within us both the emptiness and the capacity to create meaning, we begin to live in a way that doesn't depend on dates, on temporal milestones, on dramatic transformations, but that sustains itself in the quality of our presence, in the depth of our inner experience, in the courage to be who we really are without needing external justifications. Have you ever stopped to observe how we treat time as if it were a magical entity, capable of healing wounds, solving problems, and transforming personalities? As if the simple fact of days passing could automatically make us different people, wiser, more fulfilled, more complete. But when you really examine your personal experience, you realize that time, by itself, does nothing. It simply passes, neutral and indifferent, while we remain essentially the same, carrying the same fundamental questions, the same searches, the same emptiness that accompanies us regardless of how many calendars we change. This perception can be initially discouraging, especially in a culture that constantly sells hope, that next year, next month, next week will be different. But Camus shows us that there's a profound beauty in this constancy, a dignity in recognizing that we are beings in permanent process, not projects to be finalized. The emptiness you feel today is not a temporary flaw that will be corrected with time. It's a fundamental characteristic of human consciousness, the mark of our capacity to question, to search, to not be satisfied with superficial answers. When you stop seeing emptiness as a problem and start seeing it as a space of possibility, as the place where all authentic creation is born, your relationship with time changes completely. You stop waiting for the future to resolve the present and begin to inhabit the present with all its complexity and contradiction. Right at this moment, millions of people around the world are experiencing the same sensation you are, the perception that we change the calendar, but continue carrying the same existential questions, the same questionings about the meaning of life, the same feeling that something important is missing. If you're feeling this now, I want you to leave a comment writing simply, "I feel this too," because it's fundamental that you know you're not alone in this experience. Existential emptiness is not an individual pathology. It's a universal characteristic of human consciousness. And when we recognize this collectively, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable about this shared experience, we create a space of authenticity that is profoundly transformative. Your honesty about your own experience of emptiness might be exactly what someone needs to hear today, to understand that their internal struggle is normal, is human, is worthy of compassion instead of judgment. So please, share with us. Do you feel this too? What Camus teaches us about this persistence of emptiness is that it's not evidence of personal failure, but the clearest demonstration of our humanity. We are conscious beings living in a universe that doesn't offer us ready answers, doesn't deliver an instruction manual, doesn't guarantee that our searches for meaning will be satisfied definitively and permanently. This condition can seem terrifying when we see it for the first time, without the consoling masks of denial and distraction. But when we allow ourselves to really inhabit this condition, when we stop fighting against it and begin to explore it with curiosity and courage, we discover that there's an extraordinary freedom in this absence of ready-made meaning. Because if the universe doesn't give us a predetermined purpose, this means we have the responsibility and opportunity to create our own meaning, to choose our own values, to decide for ourselves what makes life worth living. The emptiness you feel when the calendar changes, but you remain the same, is not an empty emptiness. It's an emptiness pregnant with possibilities, an open space where you can plant the seeds of your own significance. The difference lies in stopping waiting for something external to come fill this space and beginning to fill it yourself, through your choices, your actions, the quality of your presence in the world. Camus called this revolt, not a revolt against life, but a revolt against insignificance. A courageous affirmation that even without cosmic guarantees, even without definitive answers, even carrying this fundamental emptiness, we choose to live with intensity, with purpose, with love. The experience of realizing that the calendar changed, but the emptiness continues, is actually a rite of passage to a more mature form of existing. It's the moment when we stop being children, waiting for adults to tell us what the meaning of life is, and become adults capable of creating meaning through our own experience. But this maturation doesn't happen all at once. It's not a single event that marks a definitive transformation. It's a gradual process, full of comings and goings, of moments of clarity, followed by periods of confusion, of acceptance, followed by resistance. And this is completely normal and human. Camus' philosophy doesn't promise a final resolution to the absurd condition of existence. It offers a way of living with this condition that preserves our dignity, our capacity to love, our possibility of creating. When you understand that emptiness won't disappear, that it's a constant companion of human consciousness, you stop spending energy fighting against it and begin to use that energy to create a meaningful life despite it, or better, through it. Because it's exactly in the honest recognition of our absurd condition that we find the raw material for authenticity. It's when we stop pretending we have all the answers, when we admit our fundamental vulnerability, when we recognize that we're all navigating in the dark, that we begin to connect in a real way with each other and create bonds based on shared truth instead of collective illusion. There's a fundamental difference between resignation and acceptance that Camus helps us understand. Resignation is passive. It's a kind of giving up masked as wisdom. It's saying whatever and withdrawing from engagement with life. Acceptance, on the other hand, is profoundly active. It's recognizing reality without surrendering to it. It's seeing limitations without allowing them to completely define our possibilities. When you accept that the calendar can change but emptiness continues, you're not resigning yourself to a meaningless life. You're positioning yourself in a way that allows creating meaning in a more solid and sustainable manner. Because the meaning you create from honest recognition of the absurd condition is a meaning that doesn't depend on illusions, that doesn't need to deny fundamental aspects of reality to maintain itself. It's a meaning that strengthens precisely because it's built on realistic foundations, because it takes into account both the possibilities and limitations of human existence. This is the silent revolution that Camus proposes. Instead of waiting for life to give us reasons to live, we give life reasons through our way of living it. Instead of looking for a meaning that's hidden somewhere in the universe waiting to be discovered, we create meaning through our capacity for choice, our ability to love, our courage to remain human in a world that often seems inhuman. The loneliness you feel when you realize the calendar changed, but you continue carrying the same questions, is not just your loneliness. It's the fundamental loneliness of every conscious human being, the loneliness of carrying a complex interiority in a world that frequently values only external appearances. But there's a difference between loneliness and isolation. Isolation separates us from each other, makes us believe we're unique in our suffering, unique in our doubts, unique in our sensation of not belonging. Existential loneliness, when recognized and accepted, can actually connect us more deeply with other human beings, because it allows us to recognize our shared humanity. When you stop pretending you have all the answers, when you admit your vulnerability, when you recognize that you're navigating uncertainty just like everyone else, you create authentic possibilities for connection. Camus speaks about the importance of human solidarity, not as a solution to the absurd, but as a dignified response to it. When we recognize that we're all in the same fundamental existential situation, all carrying our emptiness, all creating meaning in real time, all living without ultimate guarantees, we develop a natural compassion for each other. This compassion isn't born from pity or superiority, but from the recognition that we share the same condition, the same search, the same challenge of creating a meaningful life amid uncertainty. If you've made it this far in this reflection, if these words are finding some echo in your personal experience, I'd like to make a gentle invitation. This channel exists for us to create together a space where we can be honest about the complexity of human existence, where we can explore deep questions without the pressure of finding definitive answers, where we can support each other mutually in the journey of creating meaning in our lives. If this resonates with you, if you feel you could benefit from being part of this community of people who are willing to look at life without illusions, but also without despair, consider subscribing to the channel. It's not about consuming more content, it's about participating in an ongoing conversation about what it means to live authentically in a complex and frequently contradictory world. Your presence here, your participation in the comments, your own reflections and experiences, enrich this conversation for all of us. Perhaps the most liberating perception we can extract from Camus' philosophy is that we don't need to wait to feel complete, to begin living fully. We don't need to resolve all our existential questions before allowing ourselves to love, create, connect, seek beauty, make a difference in other people's lives. The emptiness that persists when the calendar changes is not an impediment to a rich and meaningful life. In fact, it might be exactly what keeps us searching, questioning, growing, avoiding the complacency that comes when we believe we've found all the answers. There's a vitality in conscious emptiness that's very different from the artificial vitality of those who refuse to look at the real complexity of existence. It's the vitality of those who choose to live intensely, not because they have certainties, but precisely because they don't. It's the passion of those who understand that life is brief, uncertain, frequently difficult, and even so, choose to engage with it completely. Camus tells us about the importance of imagining Sisyphus happy, finding joy and purpose in the very action of rolling the stone up the mountain, knowing it will roll back down, knowing he'll have to start over eternally. This is a powerful metaphor for our condition. We can find deep satisfaction in the very process of living, of searching, of creating, regardless of where it takes us, regardless of what final answers we find or fail to find. The calendar will continue changing year after year, decade after decade, and it's probable that you'll continue carrying fundamental questions about the meaning of life, about your purpose, about what really matters. But perhaps after this conversation, you can begin to see this continuity not as a failure, but as a precious characteristic of human consciousness. Perhaps you can begin to inhabit your emptiness with more dignity, to create meaning with more courage, to connect with other human beings from a place of honesty instead of performance. Life doesn't need to have ready-made meaning to be lived with intensity and purpose. In fact, it's precisely because we don't have ultimate guarantees that each choice we make has weight, that each moment of love we share has value, that each act of creation becomes a small act of revolt against insignificance. When you wake up tomorrow, carrying the same questions as always, remember that this isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that you are deeply human. And being deeply human, with all the uncertainties that implies, is one of the most precious experiences available in the universe. The calendar will change again, but you'll have the opportunity to choose, once more, how to inhabit your humanity, how to create significance, how to love despite the absence of definitive answers. And this choice, renewed each day, is where all the dignity and all the beauty of being alive resides.